Thank you, Chairwoman Waters. Mr. Camphausen, in your testimony, you note how Chinese banks have provided subsidized financing for 5G globally, and including especially Huawei's actions globally. So as we seek to prevent China from setting the network standards for the future, what can we do to better promote our company's competitiveness, and what can we do to cooperate with allies to ensure that Beijing doesn't militarize these new technologies?
Thank you, Ranking Member McHenry. I think it's important to understand the differences in the Chinese system, perhaps at the outset. China is not a party to the OECD arrangements, and so it's not constrained by the reporting and accountability procedures that the United States and her allies would be, for instance. They also disaggregate and diversify their export credit support in ways that require some effort to fully understand it. They provide export credit insurance through Sinosure, which has provided up to $500 billion in assistance in the last 6 years. There is a China Exim Bank, and our own Exim Bank has estimated that they've provided in 2017 about $36 billion in export credit finance. But they also use Chinese policy and development banks to provide export credit assistance. And this is where it becomes especially difficult to understand or to aggregate what they're providing. For instance, U.S. Exim Bank estimates that China Development Bank provided Huawei, a company that is a global leader and a competitor for 5G, a huge amount of export-like financing, and totally perhaps up to $10 billion a year. I noted in my testimony that Huawei undercut Ericsson in Netherlands very recently, I'm sure you've seen this, by 60%, terms that were only possible because of the use of export credit finance that it gained from Chinese development and policy banks. So I think the first step is to understand the nature of what we're competing with, and I think that will make some important progress.
So first understand it, but what do you do in response? What should we do as policymakers to ensure that we're responding and competing on 5G?
5G is a complex issue, as you know. There's advantages to being the early leader, both in terms of the patents that will then provide resources and require payments down the line. I think we need to think holistically about the opportunities that 5G represents, and so, you know, the opportunities that that this committee is considering, I think, are important ones as well. Maybe I can come back to you with some more concrete examples.
If I could add on that, I think one of the most important things that we are hearing from our manufacturers is assuring robust competition in this market and supplier diversity. No one wants to be limited to a sole source supplier, and we shouldn't have our allies similarly being limited to sole source suppliers. So in the context of this hearing, is there, and the Exim Bank reauthorization, is there more that the Exim Bank can do to promote our exports, to promote our participation in these in the development of 5G internationally in a way that promotes competition, prevents sole source suppliers like what we've been talking about, and really has more supplier diversity? I think there are some ways we can do that.
Mr. Wilburn, are there ways that we can simplify the paperwork requirements for small businesses so they can better access Exim Bank financing?
Ranking Member, that's an excellent question because it's overwhelming for a small business to comply. But I understand the need for due diligence and proper vetting of all these.
What does the paperwork look like?
What does the paperwork look like?
Massive.
Massive.
All right, so we could simplify that process a little bit. Ms. Sharma, would you agree?
Absolutely, I would agree with that. It is very daunting for small businesses like us and even micro businesses that our customers are like to able to complete paperwork and go to a bank. It's really daunting. To make it simpler would be much
Sure.
easier.
So there should be a technology solution as we move forward, and a mandate on XM to actually come to really the private sector standards for completing these loans and application reform. Thank you, Chairwoman Waters, for holding this hearing. Thanks for your engagement on this, and look forward to continuing the bipartisan approach that this committee is desirous of on XM.
Thank you very much.